Hello, everybody, and welcome to Radical Democracy. I'm Maddie Cheers. Thank you for joining us here on Strong Island Radio and also live on the TuneIn app. Today, we are with Robert Vetter again. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Vetter, to talk about, as you know, Indigenous leadership, the radical and almost unimaginable practice of actually leading by example. What a concept. So, we have talked about the Great Law of Peace in the past. I'm going to give out the number before we start completely. So we'd love to have you call in. The number here is 516-945-9099. That's 516-945-9099. So we're going to go back to the Great Law of Peace, and we're going to kind of break it down and focus completely on the Haudenosaunee idea of what makes a good leader. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and if you'd like to kind of go through the details of that description of leadership.
Well, let's start with the Haudenosaunee for any of our listeners who might not be up to speed on that.
Thank you.
The word Haudenosaunee is people of the Longhouse, and originally they were comprised of 5 nations: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. Much later, they were joined by a 6th nation called the Tuscarora. So today, they're found scattered all over upstate New York, the extreme northern part of New York State, and on both sides of the Canadian border. And Maddie and I both have the opportunity to talk about Haudenosaunee government every day in the work that we do with children. So this is a topic that's very much close to our hearts, and we've mentioned it here in the past. Today we're going to revisit their concept of leadership, but we're also going to try to unpack it and see what the implications are of that information and how it's applicable to us in our modern world today. So with that, I'll review the 10 qualities of a leader. So for the Haudenosaunee, they have a different, although a lot of what they gave us is information that informed Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin in the formation of the United States government. There are certain elements that are significantly different in their government than ours. And one of these has to do with this concept of leadership, that men are the leaders, but women are the ones who vote those men into office. So this is at the basis of what they consider to be an equality of genders, that while the men are the ones who are making the laws, the women are the ones who vote them into office, observe the work that they do, and have the option of removing them from office if they don't continue to do the job properly and if they don't put the needs of the people ahead of themselves.
Right.
And that creates a completely different structure of government than we have, even though there are elements of their government that we can find in ours when we look at that historical link between the two. So women are the ones who vote the men into office, and I wanted to mention why women are the ones who vote the men into office before we even get to the qualities. Women are the ones who vote men into office because the women are the ones who watch the behavior of the children, particularly the boys, and see what they're like early on. So men's roles traditionally among the Haudenosaunee were to take them away from the village, while the women were the ones in charge of the Longhouse itself, and they were the ones clearly who were present in the family all the time. So if you were a boy running around doing the things that boys do, you were under the observation not only of your mother, but of all of the women of your mother's age. They all had the equivalent right to tell you what to do, and they all were interested in watching you to figure out who you are. And that's why when I talk to the kids about this that we work with, I tell them that in a way I think that the women were the ones who could look into the soul of that child.
Right.
Because they were around them constantly, watching them. And the Haudenosaunee believe that our character is formed early on in childhood. So if you want to know what a child's going to be like as an adult, just watch the way they behave. It's not what we say that's important, it's what we do that's important. And that behavior at an early age is a clear indicator of the qualities that that person has. the character, the person that you are underneath everything. And that's why when we're working with children, I explain to them that what really determines who you are from the Haudenosaunee point of view is the way that you interact among your peers. And that's why I always shock them when I ask them, who do you think I think knows you better than anybody? And they're going to say their parents, and I say no. My brother and sister, no. Me, no. And I always tell them that it's your teachers. And I say that because the teachers in our modern world today are the ones who see a child's actions among peers in a way that parents don't. So the women are the ones who vote the men into office, and the women are the ones who remove that man from office. And if they remove a man from office, or if he dies while he's in office, either way, the women have 3 days to come up with a new leader. With an extension, they can have a total of 10 days to come up with a new leader. And at that point, they need a unanimous decision. And that's, of course, the challenge, is for the men to have a unanimous decision to create a law, and the women to have a unanimous decision in order to elect a new leader. So to make that easier, the Haudenosaunee give their women a checklist of 10 qualities. And that way they can consider each man and find the man who has the 10 qualities. But it also leaves them open to the comparative analysis of all of the other women. So if Susan comes up with an idea that she wants Bill to be the Loyane or leader, called man of the good, and Julie knows that he did something that violated one of the 10 qualities, then she is bound by duty to explain to everybody, yeah, except I saw him do such and such that violated one of these qualities.
And I also think it's worth mentioning here that in the old ways, according to Tom Porter, in the old ways, the women also chose the clan mothers, and the women also had final approval of the laws. It's not quite that way yet again today, but in the original teachings, that's how it was. And the other thing I'd like for us in our modern world to think about, because sometimes it's hard for us to hear about this, oh, well, women did one thing, men did another thing, and we place our cultural judgment on that. Oh, are you saying one's more important than the other? So maybe for us, it would be important to remember that all these jobs are considered equal. No one's job was more important than somebody else's. And it's also important even in this modern world, you could even think about it as what are these higher masculine qualities that we're talking about, and what are these higher feminine qualities that we're talking about when we're looking at who our leaders should be. And like I said last week, you're going to find that those qualities meet, they come together.
So let's go over the qualities. So number one is that this man be a family man. And what they specifically mean by that is he has to be married, he has to have never been divorced, and he has to have a minimum of 3 children. And the reason for 3 children is because he has to be able to replace himself, his wife, and contribute 1 extra member to the community. They also say that until you have children, you really don't understand what it is to put somebody else's needs ahead of yourself. And he has to have always been faithful to his wife. He has to have always been considerate of his wife. So the way that he treated his wife and children becomes a metaphor of how he is within the entire community. So that all of that goes under the heading of being a family man, to their way of defining it.
And I remember when we first learned about this, it was during the Clinton-Lewinsky issues, and Tom made it very clear that if Bill Clinton had been a Haudenosaunee leader, he would have been kicked out of office for his behavior immediately.
True. So number one, he's a family man. Number two is that he never lied or cheated or stole anything ever. And again, one woman might bring up one man for this, but any other woman who had seen him violate that would be bound to let everybody know. So that's quality 2. Quality 3 is that he is a peaceful man, and peace is at the core of all of these values and this entire way of life. And what that means is that he doesn't resolve his differences and problems through violence of any kind. And when they say violence, they mean not only actions, not only throwing a punch at somebody, but violent words, a person who uses his words to incite violence or as a weapon against somebody else.
Right, to intimidate, to belittle. That is very important. We talked a little bit about that last week on the show, about how when we look at our leaders today, we hear a lot on both sides of the aisle of belittling, degrading. There's a lot of this, what I think of as like a revenge motive, or even it's like a playground motive. Well, he did it first, so if he said it, I get to say it. If she did it, I get to do it. So it's very important to understand how these values play into what we're looking at in our leadership today.
The next quality is to have skin 7 layers thick. And what that means in our common everyday language, it's to have a tough skin. And that's important because no matter who you are, if you're a leader, somebody's going to have something to say about you. I mean, if you are not in the public eye, then nobody's going to really think about you one way or another. But the minute
Right.
you are in the center of public attention in any society, all of a sudden you become a target because you've said something that everybody has heard. And chances are somebody out there isn't going to like it. So having skin 7 layers thick means being able to take it when somebody criticizes you, when somebody else belittles you, when somebody challenges you. And the easy modern way to respond to that is to respond in kind. So when
Exactly.
somebody puts you down, you put them down. And all we have to do is look at our political arena today and see that that's exactly what happens. So one of these character traits is to be strong enough and self-confident enough that you're not going to be upset. You're not going to get rattled when somebody says something really terrible about you or even about your family.
Right. You're going to see the source it's coming from and let it slide off your back, because there's more important work to do. There's more important values to uphold.
The next quality is humility, to be a humble person. And this one is almost inconceivable in our our political arena today.
It really is. And just in looking at trying to explain humility to children, when I say to kids, what is humility? Often they will say, it's when you're weak. We look at people who put others before themselves, or who are patient, or who don't brag and don't show off even when they're good at something. We look at that as a weakness in our culture, and kids have gotten that message. You can explain it to children much more quickly because I think they're closer to understanding what real humility means.
And what does humility mean? I mean, I've seen it in the traditional elders that I've known.
Absolutely.
And that's really, really different about the indigenous world than ours.
Yeah.
Is that we live in a world of self-promotion.
Yep.
So if you don't get out there and you don't stand on a soapbox and tell everybody how great you are, either in person or on a website, on the internet somewhere.
On Twitter.
On Twitter, yeah. If you don't get out there and tell everybody how great you are, they're not going to believe that you're great. Whereas in the indigenous world, it's exactly the opposite. You don't tout yourself as being great. You let somebody else do that.
If they feel like it. And if they don't, you're fine, because your focus is on serving your people. Your focus is on putting others before yourself, and your focus is on your function within the community. So if somebody doesn't praise you or point out that you got a better score here, or you got the biggest moose, or whatever it is, you're okay with that, because that's not even really in your consciousness. That's not your motivation for doing the things that you do. Whereas it's the opposite. In our world, we're highly motivated by others telling us how wonderful we are or how terrible we are.
And I think that also goes back to that we live in a much more hierarchical society in the first place. In other words,
Exactly.
we have classes, we have a class system, a class structure in place that tells us that some people are more valuable than other people.
Exactly.
Whereas in the indigenous world, it's largely egalitarian in the sense that everybody is more or less on the same footing. And there are social structures in place that make sure that somebody doesn't get too much ahead of everybody else, that they
Right.
don't use their position in a way that is an advantage to them and a disadvantage to others. And that's why the main way of restricting behavior in the indigenous world is through social criticism. Now that doesn't work in our world because we don't talk to our neighbor, we don't care about our neighbor, we don't live in the same kind of community that's based on face-to-face relations.
Right, and our communities are disconnecting. They're at a rapid rate. That's with technology. We have the false community. You know, it's I just saw this. I haven't had a chance to listen to him, but this gentleman does a whole thing on how you can't create an algorithm for being a human being, for the qualities that are human. You can't create an algorithm for sitting down and having a conversation like we're having right now. But we live in a world where the pace of technology is so fast that we are expecting the pace of humanity to equal the pace of machines. And that expectation is detrimental to who we are. And we are making choices that are detrimental to ourselves because our expectations have gone askew, in my opinion. So, and I would like to welcome Celia Kibler to the show. Thank you, Celia, who says that she was surprised that kids know what humility is. I know, and you say it's like integrity. We have to explain integrity, too. And her comment about community, I feel like community is so lost in this society.
Time out for some sound effects.
Hello there. Hello.
Welcome Celia Kibler to the show. Thank you, Celia. Hello, Madeline.
Hello, Celia Line.
Hello, Madeline.
What's up?
Hello, Bob.
Hello,
I
Celia.
have to turn off my thing. Hi, Bob. So I wanted to say that a lot of it is also that there's no communication left. You know, I know you guys know I went to see Sebastian Maniscalco, however you say his last name,
Right.
the comedian last night. And the two funniest but truest things he said is he was talking about, you know, dating girls back in the day. And he said, you know, and we would write, you know, notes to each other and little messages. And then he goes, remember writing? Because nobody writes anymore. And he said, and then he was talking about respecting other people. And then he goes, remember respect?
Yes. Oh.
And it's so true. You know, those things, as funny as it was, it's sadly true.
Exactly.
Is that there's the communication between people and kids, especially kids, because everything's just, you know, texted and, you know, and there's no handwriting and there's no talking and there's, you know, no respect.
No, and I think
and that's the hard thing.
I think sadly we're still using that old European model of our children are our property. And since our children are our property, the decisions we're making have to do what's better for us as adults. So as adults, all this technology is great. There's lots of people making money off of it. You can get your name out there if you want to, you know, if you want everybody to know who you are. But we're not thinking of the ramifications for our children in the here and now, much less our children born 7 generations from now.
Right.
And I think that the reason we're talking about leadership today is we're seeing the effect of this on our leaders and on who people choose to follow because of what they're reading on social media or what they're seeing on Twitter, as opposed to let's sit down face to face and talk to somebody.
Right. let's see what's in their facial expressions.
Yes.
Let's see what their emotions really are rather than emojis.
Exactly.
It is. So that's all I want to say. So now I will leave you to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Sil. Bye.
Bye.
So we'll pick up. Thank you, Celia. We'll pick up where we left off. So the next character trait is kindness.
Right.
Something very, very simple, but something that's largely lacking in our world, to remember to be kind toward other people.
Exactly.
I mean, that one is one that children, I think, really get.
Yes.
Some of the others, I think, are hard concepts, but they clearly get kindness, and that really has to do with the actions in our everyday life and how we treat everybody. And if you go back to what you, Maddie, said a moment ago about different jobs being the same, we live in a world where we evaluate people a lot of times based on what their job is.
Exactly.
And if you really think that everybody has a valuable job, you don't treat anybody as an inferior.
Exactly. And that's why I say, when I look at the fight over, are we going to have socialism? Are we going to have democracy? Are we going to have, what are we going to have? Are we going to have, free markets? Are we going to have limited free markets? If our value system was that everybody's job is important and everybody should have a job because everybody should contribute. When I look at some of the suggestions that are being made, it's obvious how these things are going to tear us apart and how we're going to constantly have fighting over what our economy should look like, what our social structure should look like. But if you start from the point of saying everybody who contributes, who has a job, is important in this culture. And then if you look at how they raised the children when the grandparents were looking at the children and raising the children, aside from looking at their particular character qualities to look for who was going to be the leader or the hunter or the medicine man or woman, aside from looking at that, they're looking at who they are basically and where they would be happiest. There were, of course, the jobs where everybody had to work together, but then there were the specific jobs that could align with an individual's talent, or desire or interest. So if your culture is based on getting someone into the community, in the culture that is contributing, that has a purpose, and that is happy, that is step one to peace. So that is something that we are not. We are overlaying. When I look at this argument about, socialism and all of this, we are overlaying a structure that is not, it's not imaginative, it's not creative, it's our goals are wrong. We say that we're going to have this new form of government, which is not a new form of government here, but we're not thinking about, are there other things to model? Are there other questions we should be asking? We're not saying, how do we get a happier culture? How do we get a culture where people care about each other, where they know what kindness and humility and integrity is? And you don't get that just by putting in place a gigantic government that's running around forcing people to do what they want to do, because then it's the tube of toothpaste. You squeeze here and it pops out there. So.
Next quality.
Yes.
Generosity. Again, go into the political sphere, and it's all about, what can I get as a leader? What can I get as the leader out of being in this position? Whereas if you want to make sure, in the indigenous world, if you want to make sure you're poor, go be a leader.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
when somebody needs something, you're the one they go to.
I know. I always love that example of how in the Haudenosaunee Longhouse, when they're lined up for a ceremony, and all ceremonies include food. Eventually, at the end, there's some big feast that everybody's attending, and in line to get the food, it's the leaders who are at the back of the line, so that if the food runs out, it's the leaders who do not eat. The people eat. You got to make sure of that first. And I always like to say, when I see those big state dinners at the White House,
We
can
know
you
who's
imagine?
eating first.
Yeah, we know who's eating first. That's pretty clever, Go ahead.
So generosity is another one. And next, we are up for being respectful.
Yes, which Celia just mentioned, respect.
Respecting another person. And we again, we live in a world where respect is a word that's thrown around. It's bandied around, but the kind of respect that we look for in our society is the kind that has to be forced on somebody.
Yep.
That if you're bigger, if you're meaner, if you're the assertive one, you're the one who gets the respect.
Exactly.
But again, if we go back to this indigenous concept of respect, it's kind of the opposite. It's I receive respect because I've learned how to give respect.
Yeah.
And that's really the order. That's the way that it happens.
Exactly.
I don't get respect by pushing somebody around. I gain respect, I garner respect by showing that I know how to give it to my family first, to the people around me, to the people in my village, in my community.
Exactly. And it's like Celia pointed out in leadership also, she put, like, during the government shutdown, Congress still got paid. That not even imaginable in a Haudenosaunee system. And if they had, they'd all be kicked out of office. The clan mothers would see that they were gone the next day. So go ahead.
The next one is being responsible. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? So again, almost inconceivable, but being responsible to somebody else, being responsible to your family, being responsible to your community, having standards that are expected of you to really be a citizen, and even if we go back to the roots of citizenship in ancient Greece, that was still the same concept, that I am not just an individual, that I have responsibility to a wider body than just myself and my home.
Exactly. And when we look at when we look at respect and responsibility, that it starts in the family. It starts at home, like you said. And so and the really amazing thing to me is that our real power as human beings lies in being respectful of ourselves, being responsible for ourselves and our actions. And then we can extend that respect to the community. And children in the Haudenosaunee world, or in any American Indian culture, traditional culture, are taught that in order to get respect, you first have to give it. Mm-hmm. You have to earn it. You have to show that you can participate in this. And that sometimes it means you're going to have to do things you don't want to do, but it contributes to the community. So your reward is that you are part of this big loving group that's always going to be there for you. I'm always thinking about how this statistic, we have an $11 billion legal antidepressant business in this country. $11 billion a year in antidepressants in this country. And yet it seems to me no one is asking the question, why? Why are we so upset? Why are we so miserable? We're miserable. Of course, Big Pharma is not going to ask that question because they're making buku bucks on this. And it's the same thing where if the overriding motivation of a government, of a community and a people is to see that their people are happy, their people have purpose, their people are respected and are loved and taken care of, that's a very different motivation than just saying we're going to survive. We're going to give you, right, even if you're not working, even if you don't want to work, we're going to give you a bunch of money here. You'll be able to get food, shelter, clothing. That's not a life. That's, a life is not, I get to go to the store and I get to buy food and I get a house and I get a TV and I get this and then I get to sit in front of my TV all day and what? That is not life. That is not being a full human. So these are the things, when we talk about these qualities of leadership, these are also the qualities that support life and evolution and raised consciousness. If people like Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote the book Power versus Force, are right, then the evolution of human beings is to raise our consciousness so that everyone on the planet is taken care of, is healthy, is happy. And that can't be achieved by any system that requires force. And it can't be achieved by any system that requires you to give up your personal power to somebody else. And least of all, a bureaucrat, or least of all, somebody that wants power. So I know that's probably
Which brings us to our
next
final quality.
Yep.
So the final quality is to have never campaigned. So anybody who is out there saying, I want to be a leader, that if you ever said that and anybody heard you say it, that would automatically disqualify you. And that is, it couldn't be more opposite of our world, where anybody who wants power, that's the kind of person who ends up in the
power.
Political sphere in the first place. And the reason that they want somebody who doesn't want the position in the first place is because of who that's going to be, who will show up. So if you have a position of power and somebody shows up and they want that, the thing about power is you can never have enough. People who want power always want more and more and more and more power. And in the end, that kind of person, you already know who they're looking out for. They're not looking out for the good of the people. They're looking out for themselves.
Exactly.
And that's the exact opposite of what Haudenosaunee women are looking for. And that's why it's also somewhat difficult to fill the position, because if you think about it, if you say yes to the position, you are guaranteeing that you will have a life of sacrifice, because you're going to put the needs of your community ahead of yourself.
That's right.
And even ahead of your own family. So that automatically puts you at a disadvantage. You're entering a contract for the remainder of your life where I'm going to put myself last.
Right.
I will come after everybody else.
Exactly.
And that's why they also have the proviso that when a man is nominated for the position, the women will tell him, we've decided on you. And usually he'll try to say no to get out of it. And the women have to convince him to accept the nomination when they tell him, look, you know, we've decided that you are the one. You have these qualities. This is part of your responsibility, is to do this. So if he says no, and he really means it, they'll never ask him again. But if he says yes, he'll be Loyane until the day that he dies.
And I think that's important. That the term Loyane means man of the good. You have to have a good heart and a good mind. It's the same thing with Yogoyane, the term for the clan mother, which means woman of the good heart, the good mind. You are always putting the people before yourself. I can't think of anybody in Congress who's doing that at the moment, or in the presidency, or, I mean, you could argue. We could argue back and forth about that, but
well,
I
our
think
position here clearly is bipartisan. I mean,
yes,
it is not.
It is
not.
not.
I mean, I'll speak for myself. It's not my intention to say that one party is
better,
superior to the other
exactly,
based on this conversation. Because in this conversation, they're equally guilty.
Yes.
They are equally the exact opposite of the qualities that we've listed.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about the meaning behind these qualities and what the implication is to us today.
Exactly.
So number one is the observation that if we look at those 10 qualities and we use them as a benchmark to consider our leaders, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Republicans, Democrats, or anybody else. Nobody stacks up according to those criteria. So it tells us that we clearly have another set of intentions.
Yep.
Why does somebody get to be a leader? And I mean, if we go back to the last election, how is it that in a country of 300 million people, the two people that we had a choice of voting for were Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? That tells you a lot right there about what we consider important. So clearly, the qualities that we've listed here are the antithesis of what we get as a leader.
Exactly.
So what's the meaning behind those? I mean, so if we go back to the women in the village looking for the boy who would grow up to be the man who has those qualities, they are pre-selecting. They're saying it is important within our village within our nation, within our, and again, if we go back to the Haudenosaunee, you have a village that's based on a clan. Well, you have a family,
Right.
then you have a village that's based on a clan, and then you have the nation, and then that nation has a relationship with the 6 nations that make up the Confederacy.
Right.
So we have a chain of command. And we're saying within this whole Confederacy, these are the qualities that we think are important. These are the qualities that are going to translate to a better quality of life for everybody in our village.
Everyone. And that's the breakdown. That's where, as I see it, where we the people have to take back our power. We the people have to make the decision that these value systems that we have developed may not be best for supporting human life on the planet.
No, and that's why I'd like to suggest that if we change the way, like flip the way we look at this, we could consider those 10 qualities to be a recipe.
Yes.
And here's what I mean by that. First, just a quick anecdote. So we work with 4th graders every day, and we do a government workshop. And there's a school that I have gone to for many, many years. And every time I got to the beginning of listing those qualities, the teacher, one of the teachers, always stopped me, and she said, "Bob, I just want to stop you right there, and I want to talk to the girls. Girls, these are the qualities that you should look for when you're trying to find a husband."
Yes.
And we always laughed about it because, I mean, it's sort of funny, but on another level, it's not.
No.
On another level, maybe we need to rethink what's important and say, how can we find those qualities? Or to look at it a different way, I could say to myself, let's say I'm a young person about to embark in the world, instead of finding the qualities that have led to the leadership that we have, how can I find those qualities in myself?
Yes.
How can I lead a life and walk that road?
Exactly. And that is the beauty to me of the Great Law of Peace, is that any of these teachings that come from it, and especially leadership that comes from it, can inform you of the lifestyle you personally should have. And
Leading by example.
leading by example, exactly. Leading by example, which seems to be a concept we have completely lost. I remember the other day I was in a school and I mentioned John Kennedy's famous quote where he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And one of the kids looked at me and said, "What does that mean?" And the fact that a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old doesn't know what that means shows you how far downhill we have gone since the time of John Kennedy.
It's an alien concept.
It's an alien concept that your community would come before yourself. I actually think we flipped it on its head. I actually think we have people running around going, "What can the government do for me? How much am I going to get back from the government?" And that goes to the whole idea of generosity, respect, responsibility, all of these things. And it goes again to why we are so unhappy, because our values are so fragile. They're so dependent on what we have, material gain. What we're like you said earlier, we're defining ourselves by the job we have, or by how much money we have, or what kind of house we live in. So as long as we define ourselves by what is outside of ourselves, we will be miserable. And we will continue to use drugs. We will continue to make choices that are detrimental to ourselves, because we are functioning out of fear. We are not functioning out of love, and we are not functioning out of self-respect. We are functioning out of some place of fear, of lack, I can't think of the lack will do for now, but instead of looking at the world as being abundantly beautiful, the world is abundant with wonderful, beautiful people, things in nature. We are only looking at this point, what don't I have and who can give it to me? Not what can I give to myself. And I find that is a lot of the problem and a lot of the issue for young people, at least the young people that I've talked to, is that we've flipped that whole value system on its head. And that's not sustainable. That is not healthy for humans.
Well, it also speaks to the difference between what we do as consumers versus what we do as producers.
Right.
So, I mean, if I had to give any advice to young people today, it would be to figure out a way to become a producer. You know,
Yeah.
it's very easy to sit back and consume because that's what all the it's what the social pressure is for us
Right.
is to consume. So
Right.
we're consuming when we buy, we're consuming when we watch television, we're consuming when we engage in anything in the marketplace other than when we create something new. And that would be my advice, is to figure out how you can create and contribute to the lives of others.
But the culture has to value your creating and your
True.
contributing. And that's the message we are not giving to kids. This is where the public school system is letting us down. This is where, again, we have decided that our children serve ourselves. When we simply look at the Common Core curriculum, when we look at the insistence on standardized testing, to the detriment, we have a 900% increase in anxiety disorders in children in elementary school. Unheard of prior to this generation. And though we go to our leaders, talk about not putting your people before yourself. We go to our leaders with brain research, with psychology research, with educational research, even with billionaires, like Jack Ma and Bill Gates saying we have to stop this testing. We have to stop telling children they're not smart enough, they're not good enough. We have to develop them like the Haudenosaunee did for who they are. We have to see their genius, and we have to let that humanity flow out. You could say that from today till tomorrow to some of our leaders, and all they're thinking about is, yeah, but then, if I dump tests, then how am I going to sell houses? That's the lobby. That's the lobby for keeping testing. Real estate developers, real estate agents. How do I sell houses? Because I'm selling these houses to young families based on test scores. Screw selling the houses. That's what I'm saying. We the people should be doing what Florida's do. Florida just dumped Common Core. Florida decided they were going to put their children before themselves. I heard that one of the districts here on Long Island is dumping it. I don't know what that means, but we the people are going to have to say, no, we're not electing you again because you do not put us and your children before yourself. You're only interested in gaining power, in becoming president or becoming congressman or becoming congresswoman or becoming Speaker of the House. That's your interest. We can see that now. So you're out. We have to be the clan mothers. We have to say, no, you broke your promise. You did not put us before you. You're gone. We're picking somebody new. And our value system is, who are we picking that puts us before themselves? That's who we pick.
Well, we need to start close to home.
Yes.
And that's the thing. I mean, you have a disintegration of American society and values, and of course, we see it in our political sphere as well. So we have to start somewhere in creating a different sense of what it is to be valuable as a human being.
And I also want to speak to something that you and I talked about already in politics, is we have to value what it means to be a human being, and we have to recognize when somebody is manipulating us. When I mentioned the book Power versus Force and this map of consciousness, where he talks about these emotions that people have, and fear Fear ranks way down there in force. So, in other words, if you are going to force somebody to do something, if I want to get my way as a leader, the easiest way for me to do it is to make you fearful. If I make you fearful enough, I am guaranteed to get what I want. I'm functioning not on a higher level. I'm not up there with enlightenment. I mean, I'm not up there with, the Gandhis and the Jesuses and the Buddhas and the Mother Teresas and the Martin Luther Kings. I'm just a couple of steps above you. I'm one step above you with desire and maybe even a couple steps above you with pride. But I am above the person that's fearful, so I'm more likely to get what I want. And we mistake power, real power, for forcing somebody to do what you want them to do. So I would like for you to speak to that whole concept of fear and the two examples we talked about today.
So what came to me just very recently was that we have this issue of fear playing out in both parties. And the example that I came up with is abortion and gun laws.
Right.
And both of them are at extremes. They're both polarizing people because nobody is willing to have a discussion where they try to meet somewhere in the middle and talk about it.
Exactly.
So for the left, the issue is abortion. And what we're seeing now with this new legislation in New York that says that you can have an abortion up to 9 months is taking the idea that there may be circumstances where abortion is a good thing, and they're pushing it to an absolute extreme.
And they're using the fear that if we don't push it to this
Exactly.
extreme, abortion will disappear
Exactly.
completely, and we'll be back in the 50s before
Exactly.
Roe v. Wade.
So fear is what is leading to the extreme in that position. We have to push this as far as we possibly can in order to make sure that nobody takes away the right to have an abortion.
Exactly.
And we could make the same argument when it comes to gun legislation for the right.
Mm-hmm.
So the right is fearful that all guns are going to be taken away. And if you're worried that all guns are going to be taken away, the solution is absolutely no control at all.
Right.
Full access to any weapons under any circumstances.
Right.
And, their fear is, well, if we start having background checks in order to get a weapon, well, then what's next? They're going to come to my door and they're going to tell me to hand over all of my guns.
Right.
And in both cases, we have an extreme position based on fear.
Yep.
Whereas if somehow we could meet in the middle, we might be able to come up with a solution that is a moderate one.
And this is the problem, though, is that our leadership does not want to meet in the middle. When you listen to a lot of these young leaders, very popular young leaders, they don't want to debate. They don't want to. They are making fun of centrists. I mentioned that last week, as if wanting to take the middle road is something bad. I hate to tell you, children, but I think Buddha was a little more enlightened than you. And when Buddha said, find the middle path, I think he knew something you don't know.
And if we go back to the Haudenosaunee example and why that is so significant at this point, it was the other main thing that's different about their way of government compared to ours is the necessity to have a unanimous decision. And if you are requiring that all decisions are unanimous, you darn well better meet somewhere in the middle because you're not going to get everybody to agree. So to them, any decision had to be a unanimous one. So if the decision was to create a law, all of your leaders have to agree. Well, how are all of your leaders going to agree if they haven't compromised in some way?
Exactly.
When it comes to electing a leader, all of the women have to agree, which means that in their case, they believe that they truly have found the man of the good, and that leader then has the support of everybody in the community. So that eliminates all the backstabbing and infighting and everything that we see simply by insisting on unanimous decisions. And that's also why all of their people, all of their leaders had to be incredible statesmen, had to have an incredible use of language, a very sophisticated use of language and thinking in ways that bring people together instead of dividing them.
Well, and that quality of being open-minded, where you are willing to listen to somebody else's point of view, that is essential in leadership. You cannot be so arrogant as to think that you are the one that is completely right. You may have a wonderful idea, it may be really good, but the test is, can you open that idea to other people, and then can you listen to what they have to say about your idea? And that's where this unanimous decision idea is so important, but it requires patience, and it requires you to leave your ego at the door. And
because I may have to change it somewhere along the way.
Exactly. I am going to have to adjust. I'm going to have compassion for other people. And this is where I was thinking about this in terms of one of the issues we're dealing with the open border thing and the politician, the AOC, where she's denigrating the ICE agents and these Gestapo-like tactics and all of this, and that is a lack of compassion. You want open borders. You think that's a good thing. There are millions of people who do not. You have to be willing to sit down and talk to them, tell them why you think it's a good thing. And then you have to have compassion for all these ICE agents that you want to fire, that you are now characterizing as Nazis and Gestapo-like. That shouldn't even come out of your mouth if you're a leader. These are people who were hired legally to do a job. So if you were a real leader, what you would be saying is, this is the immigration law we have in place now. This is the problem. I want this immigration law where our borders are open, everybody gets to go back and forth, our ICE agents will no longer be needed, so we're going to put them into other jobs so they can still support their families. We're not going to characterize them as monsters because they are not, just because you think that enforcing a law you don't like makes them a monster. Congress has the responsibility to change the law. So first, you have to understand how the U.S. government works. You have to take the time to figure that one out. And you are getting nowhere, you are getting us nowhere on either side of the aisle if all you can do is name call and characterize people doing a job, a legal job under the law of the United States in a way you don't like. That is not maturity, and that is not leadership.
Leaders need to bring people together and come to the table.
Exactly. So, any final words? Any final thoughts?
I think that's really the bottom line. Is leadership should bring people together instead of dividing us. If we look at leadership today, in the current political sphere, we see the fallout of leadership out of control, where leaders get their power by dividing people. We'd like to see a reversal in leadership where leadership brings people together.
Exactly. And it's the old European thing, divide and conquer. Well, it's not just European, it's all over the world. And the other half of the world, not this half of the world, when indigenous people were running the show. Okay, so I had a question from when the show where Destiny Herndon De La Rosa was on. Destiny, and for those of you that did not listen to the show, is the founder of a group called New Wave Feminists. These are young millennial women who are pro-life in the sense that they are not anti-Roe v. Wade. They are pro-life. So we had a question from that show where a listener asked, well, if you are not for overturning Roe v. Wade, then why do you not call yourself pro-choice? So Destiny was kind enough to answer, and I'm going to read her response verbatim. So, For me, as a peace activist, it's kind of similar to how we deal with war. You often hear people say, I want a strong military that we never have to use. And in theory, I agree with that statement. However, the reality of that looks like investing billions in tanks and planes and hundreds of thousands of people ready and waiting to be activated, and a military-industrial complex chomping at the bit for a president to start another war. When you create industry, the demand follows. It's cultivated by the very business created for that purpose. In that same way, I've naively said in the past, I don't care if abortion is legal or illegal, mostly because I think a certain amount will happen no matter what. Keep clinics open, but empty. I used to be so idealistic. I know how businesses run now. I know how Planned Parenthood makes their big money, and it's through abortion and masterfully marketing it as necessary, just like war. They've convinced the masses women need abortion. That statement alone makes my feminist feelers go up, because anytime you tell me I need something to succeed, that I have to terminate my child to fit into the system, I'm going to rebel against that system. It's already heavily flawed. Another thing that I've really been intrigued by lately is the idea that post-abortive women are often gaslighted by the pro-choice side. A friend was telling me a story about a woman who had an abortion in her early 20s, and afterwards her life spun out of control. She was being sexually reckless, using massive amounts of drugs and alcohol. Everything was a mess. She went to counselor after therapist after psychotherapist, and when she would mention how she had an abortion and ask if that might be at the root of her behavior, each one told her that was absolutely not it. For their own ideological reasons, they had to believe that abortion had no emotional consequences. And so her life continued to spin out of control until one day she was talking to a clergyman, even though she was an atheist, and she mentioned the abortion. She told him she wondered how it might be affecting her, and he was the very first person to validate feelings and say, of course, that could be manifesting in your psyche in different ways. That's the day she was finally able to confront it head on and get her life together. He validated what she already knew. Isn't that fascinating? But I do think industry and the brilliant marketing campaigns Planned Parenthood has been able to come up with are at the root of all of this. They're not here to help women. They're a business that needs customers. That is why we're seeing abortion become so commonplace. If it was truly just a decision between a woman and her doctor, that might be different. But just like with Big Pharma, we are seeing abortion pushed on society for profit. They've invented a need so they can profit off the demand, and they do. So that is Destiny's response to the question posed to her. Now, I would like to add something. I would like to, I guess in a way, and I don't want to seem arrogant by doing this, but I would like to remind the sisters my age that when we marched, and I quote, we marched for, and I quote, safe, legal, and rare. And that is not what has happened. And that is not raising us up as women. On the other hand, this new pro-life movement, as we see with New Wave Feminists, as expressed by Big Ocean Women, which is an international pro-life, and they describe themselves as pro-life culture. Their goal is to create a society where women are held in such high esteem by the culture and by themselves that abortion becomes unnecessary and unthinkable. I don't think that's an unworthy goal. I think that is the goal we started out with. And as Bob was saying, if you go down the center, if you look for leaders that are willing to bring us together, I think if we as women talked about it, we would see that that is our goal. Our goal is to create a worldwide society where women are held in such high esteem by themselves and by others that there simply isn't a need. There is not a need for anyone to have an abortion. So I think that is where, we have to shift our values. We have to shift the conversation. We have to do what the Haudenosaunee did, where women were held in that kind of esteem, where a family was held in that kind of esteem, where the community was held in that kind of esteem, where each individual was held in a kind of esteem that made them feel important and necessary and valuable to the community as they were. Not somebody else telling them what to do, but to go by the foundation of kindness, respect, compassion. That's what I find myself asking lately. I don't see leaders out there in our government who have compassion, who are willing to sit down and talk to each other and talk to us. They certainly aren't talking to us. Sometimes I don't know who they're talking to. You know, they are talking to their supporters. They are talking to the people who gave them the money to get elected to begin with. That's who they're talking to. So we, the people, are going to have to make a decision about, do we want to continue with these kinds of leaders, or do we want to change who we are thinking about as leaders and what we are thinking of ourselves even. It is our personal responsibility to take this task and to bring it into action for us and for the next 7 generations. So I want to thank you all for listening so much. Peace, love, have a great week, and we'll talk again next Sunday. Thank you.